sleeper, so that hasn't been a major
Did you have that situation?
complaint of mine.
No, I'm just, Rudd might not come.
Oh, okay.
So it's possible here that between me, Joel, and Carney, two of us would be yes.
Today's a corner, so if two sit there, here's the chief. Here, look over there. The good thing about that, like I said,
Everyone wants to say, so you get 2 minutes, but it's not.
With the color count.
You can have questions, just to say it's more than one shot.
that's just up to you.
You guys want to balance it out at all, or just all on that side?
Oh, they're just used to being over there.
Yeah, on the other side of you.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, you are the one
I'm always the farthest to the left. That's my role.
he wants to be away from his sister.
Okay, we're going to get this meeting started. This is a meeting of the Committee of the Public Works. My name is Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Hogan, Councilor Carney, Councilor Driscoll, Councilor Bay, and as well as Eric Ennis and Corey Dunham-Driscoll. So just ground rules of how the meeting's going to go. We're going to start out with the kind of overview of the proposed changes to the current ordinance of the food truck regulations. From there, the councilors will ask questions to clarify any questions on it. And then from there, we'll open it up to public comment. So the ground rules for this is going to be everyone will get 2 minutes to say their piece. You get one shot at it, so you can't come back up. It's not meant to be a Q&A between different participants. It's just kind of a 2-minute statement on your reaction to the proposed rules. So if you'd like to fill it out, please fill out one of these cards. You can see Jim in the back, and then we'll just go through that way. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Eric and Corey.
Sure. All right, well, good afternoon, councilors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And so, as was mentioned, looking to really have a discussion on proposed changes and recommended amendments to the food and mobile food vendor permit or ordinance here within the city of Syracuse. So back in December, the hearing that was originally held provided a lot of feedback and perspective from the changes that went into effect to this ordinance prior. And while those conversations and that hearing was taking place, myself, as well as other members of the city, had discussions with food truck representatives. These would be from the Syracuse Food Truck Association, also discussions with the Central New York Food Truck Alliance, but then also speaking with brick and mortar businesses, restaurants, eateries, that shared their perspective on what they've seen since the changes to the ordinance had gone into effect, as well as direct communication with the Downtown Committee of Syracuse as well. And at the same time, we were also talking with individual food truck owners who may not be directly involved with either the association or the alliance, and then community members who also weighed in, shared their perspective on any potential changes as well. So all of those conversations have taken place leading up to today. And then another really key conversation that was held was discussion between departments and really on behalf of the administration. So I was able to convene a work group of several departments, and from key departments I'll just list here, which would be permitting and licensing on behalf of the Central Permit Office, Department of Public Works. We had the Parks Department involved. We had myself as Neighborhood and Business Development. We had the Mayor's Office involved with Corey directly involved in these discussions, and as well as the Syracuse Police Department and Syracuse Fire Department. So really, we were able to convene this group that provided direct expertise, what they've seen over the years with different food trucks and other parks and street closures and things of that nature. So I know we have a couple of those members that were on that work group with me. So I do want to thank all of my colleagues that directly participated in that leading up to this. So the purpose of this and really the discussion that we're having today was really intended to find a way to strike a balance between brick and mortar eateries that have their physical locations, and then food trucks that have the mobile locations, mobile spots where they were looking to operate here within the city of Syracuse, and especially downtown, with this particular emphasis placed on the rodeos that had taken place, which are a relatively new addition and amenity here in the city of Syracuse and in downtown. So with that being said, and just so you know, to document what you have in front of you, which would be a memo that outlines those proposed recommended changes, we also have a number of blocks that are being proposed to be added to the ordinance where food trucks would be allowed to operate individually, aside from the rodeo process, and then a map where those proposed blocks are located within the city. Certainly I'll be diving right into this, but if you do have any questions or you want to stop for clarification, please feel free to do so. So diving right into it, item number 1, which would be the inclusion of late night service. So in discussions, again, with all stakeholders involved in this process, one of the things that we identified was later in the hours in downtown Syracuse, especially where there is the nightlife and nightlife district, there really is a shortage or not as many restaurants that are operating in those late night hours, especially between kind of the midnight or later when most kitchens are closing for bars and restaurants. We saw an opportunity to potentially open up a new avenue for food trucks to operate and also create an amenity that might draw people into downtown as well. And there were 2 primary benefits as to what you have before you with the recommendation. It would be to allow food trucks to operate in specifically the primary location of Perseverance Park, directly in the park itself, but then also using potentially Clinton Square as an overflow location. And 2 primary benefits that we wanted to promote was, yes, the ability to add greater food amenities and food options, but then also when the bars are letting out in the evening hours, having the ability to move some of that crowd and that traffic away from specifically Clinton Street and Walton Street, where there is a lot of people in the street and a lot of rideshare people that are trying to get an Uber or a Lyft, being able to move some of that traffic and energy over to Perseverance Park and Salina. So we think that this is actually going to have certainly it creates a benefit for trucks themselves to operate and people to maybe frequent those trucks, but also looking at other locations where traffic and ride sharing and those kind of things can really look at Salina Street in a different section of downtown.
Okay.
Sure.
I think this is a great idea. I think most of the restaurants downtown are closed at these times, and there are plenty of people that come downtown that are probably looking to eat something at that time. My only concern with that would be is what's the police presence going to be like? Because I know there's a lot over on Walton there. We close off the street and have several officers on either side. Are we going to do something similar or have additional officers in the area? Because I would just worry about the safety of individuals.
Yeah, so we had Syracuse Police at the table when we were looking at this as a recommendation, and while you won't see a street closure the way it is on Walton Street with this, we specifically asked about what would it be like to monitor kind of the situation there. Do you feel like this is something that could help the situation? And from SPD's perspective, they did feel strongly this would be a benefit. It's a little bit more open in Perseverance Park, so you'd be able to monitor and I think keep an eye on what's going on a little bit better, as opposed to maybe the Clinton and Walton Street area. So if this does go into effect and this is adopted, then we would work with SPD on what that strategy looks like for those late night hours. Okay. So moving into item number 2. So this refers to the expanded map of location. So I know that in talking with food trucks and talking with some of the operators, they certainly felt like downtown Syracuse and maybe University Hill were some of the primary market areas and market share of where they wanted to operate. We really feel strongly that there's additional areas, additional business corridors where there's an opportunity to bring new food service amenities and serve the neighborhoods across the city itself. So we really focused on some of the particular neighborhood business corridors with the map that's being proposed in approximately 60 new blocks that we would be looking at. With these blocks themselves, the trucks still have to comply with the distance that's required within the ordinance, and that would be from the front door of a restaurant or an eatery. But this would look at additional locations where trucks could occupy individually. As long as there's a parking space and they're able to look at that one particular block, they would have the ability to do so and begin their food service. So that primarily kind of covers item number 2. And that still, that with everything that's being included in this map, they are still subject to everything that's required within the ordinance itself. So item number 3. Well, actually, just going back to number 2 really quick, I want to add that we're also looking at city parks as well as an opportunity where trucks would have the ability to work with people that are maybe using the areas for recreation, or if there's activities taking place in the park or events, allowing trucks to operate there. So we have specifically designated these 6 or so parks within the city: Meacham Field, the Inner Harbor, Burnett Park, Elmwood Park, Schiller Park, and Onondaga Park, both the upper and lower sections. So that's also included in this as a part of those.
And I imagine you would, of course, consult with the district councilors representing those parks.
Absolutely. Yep.
Always.
Thank you.
Yep, and certainly feedback or thoughts on whether all these parks or changing which parks would be included in this. We're very open to that conversation. And so then looking at item number 3, so looking at the idea of placing a cap or a limitation on the number of rodeos that would be allowed to operate within a particular space. This is something that we've discussed really on both sides with the food truck associations as well as brick and mortar. Last year, Clinton Square was primarily the spot, or really the only spot where you saw this take place within downtown Syracuse. We had 19 rodeos that took place in 2019. So far to date, we've received applications for 21 food truck rodeos. We have not issued any permits because of the fact we knew we were going through this process. We were engaging with the council. So before any permits were being issued for rodeo events, we wanted to work our way through this process right now. And so the number, as we convened our work group, as we had discussions, the number that we had considered internally was 14 rodeos that would be placed on a cap that could be the maximum held in any given location. The thought process behind that and some of the logic was that would be about a third decline of about 33% from what was being proposed for Clinton Square in particular. And that was one of the things that we did hear from a lot of businesses in the surrounding area was that they were impacted financially and they did see a loss on those particular Wednesdays where those food truck rodeos were taking place. And so the idea would be putting a maximum cap and really just not having a concentrated impact on one single location where those rodeos were taking place, and then therefore hindering or harming those businesses just at that one particular location. And in addition, as a part of that, we were looking at other opportunities where rodeos may be able to take place. And so you will see in the presentation here in the memo, Clinton Square is still included, but we've also looked at Billings Park on the southern edge of downtown Syracuse. Walnut Park, this would be an area very specifically where we feel confidently in working with parks. We would be able to have a portion of Marshall Street that would be closed, so this would be a similar street closure. And then the final one would be a location in the lakefront, either Franklin Square or the Inner Harbor, having the ability for trucks to operate there. And so one of the things I would just emphasize as well, both Corey and myself were very open in working with the council and speaking with the council on if there's thoughts on the particular number of 14, what is appropriate there and what that process should look like with these changes. Okay, so moving into item number 4. So this was taking a look at the distance in which food trucks were allowed to operate from a brick and mortar restaurant or an eatery. Right now, the way it's written in the ordinance, that is 100 feet. We were looking at other communities, taking a look at comparison, and so the proposal here would be to increase that to 150. Other communities that we had looked at, for example, was Schenectady or Ithaca, and some of those communities where it was 200 feet, or in Boulder, Colorado, it's 150 feet. So we felt like being able to increase that by about 50 feet, giving a little bit of a buffer, additional buffer for brick and mortar restaurants to not have a truck that might be located right next to a spot where people could eat or dine. And so that is something that's included as a part of these changes as well. So moving into number 5, so this would be increased enforcement of ordinance that may be already on the books. And so one of the things that we had specifically looked at was creating new language that was focused and dedicated to the rodeo specifically. And this is going to be including that right now there's an annual license process, and that's a $500 permit that's required. It gives a food truck the ability to operate throughout the year. With rodeos in particular, in this new section of language with rodeos, we would require any participant within a rodeo would require to have the full annual license instead of using a one-time permit. And certainly I'll get to the one-time permits in just a minute. But this was something where we wanted to have the application process, something where we have all of our participants within the rodeos themselves participating as a part of this annual review process, really as the season is kicking off. We also were looking at, with the rodeo language, adding another trash receptacle. One of the things that we did hear and we did have some issues with last year, was when the rodeos were taking place, there was trash and debris and some issues when the trucks had left. We wanted to say this year we're going to be certainly holding trucks accountable and making sure that everyone participating, we're able to make sure that when they leave, when the trucks have vacated, it really wouldn't look like a rodeo had just taken place, and that from an aesthetic standpoint and also for the sake of the district and within our parks and other areas, we want to make sure that trucks are not causing issues in that regard to residents, downtown employees, things like that.
So Eric, city parks personnel would be there stationed?
So the way,
Make sure everybody adheres to this policy?
Yep. So we have a great team within our Parks Department for special events. And so what they were doing was working directly with...
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I thought so. And so working directly with the rodeos, and this took place last year too, but it was making sure that we were communicating properly with trucks, and I think making sure our staff felt empowered, that they were able to have these conversations on, if here's what we were seeing. I think that rodeo by rodeo, we kept learning and we kept kind of adapting as we went. And so that's a key thing that we really wanted to communicate, is that we'll be paying close attention to trash or litter violations. The annual license is something new that would be going into effect. And then just making sure that, you know, we are working directly with Food Truck, the association or the alliance directly if rodeos are taking place, and making sure that their members are compliant with all these things that we're putting into effect. So that is certainly something that we're going to work from the staff perspective on, but also working with any of the applicants that are looking to do rodeos or looking to do street closure events. So moving into item number 6. So this was something that actually came directly from a food truck that we spoke with, and it was an idea I think that was unique, but it kind of streamlined efficiencies. We learned that there's 2 different permits that can be sought by food trucks. One to actually operate as a food truck directly, and then the other if you have a propane tank that you would need a propane permit. So the question that was kind of raised with us is, could you combine that into one review process? We talked with the Syracuse Fire Department, which specifically oversees the propane permit process. And they said, this is,
Say that 3 times
yeah,
fast.
that's a bit of a tongue twister there. So overseeing that process, we worked with the fire department, and they said certainly this could be wrapped in. So we are going to be testing this out this year. This will mean that you just have to drop off one piece of paperwork and one form and all the attachments, and then you'll be able to also have your propane tank permit issued as a part of that. So that's going to be just something from an efficiency standpoint that we're looking to implement this year. And then finally, looking specifically at the single-use permit fee. And so right now, as it currently stands, it's a $20 cost for a single use, which would be for one event, or if you were to locate for one day within the city of Syracuse. That's $20 right now, and we felt like it was appropriate to increase that to $50, something that, you know, is certainly still allows a truck to be profitable and be able to monetarily benefit, but something that would allow the city to benefit more for the effort that we're putting into this as well. So that would be something, and that's a proposal that we have for the 2020 season, and also something that we believe would be an incentive for trucks to go ahead and get that annual license. And again, it just helps with our record keeping. We already have the trucks that are participating in our books within the city, as opposed to someone coming in kind of right before an event, signing on for a one-time use permit, and really the task of making sure that they have all their paperwork and everything lined up. So so that really runs through, and I know that was really high level, but that is the summary of the proposed changes that we would be looking to put into effect.
Yeah, so I can start. Eric, appreciate it. So I have a number of questions I'll try to speed through. Some of them I've asked in the previous meeting that we were in, and so I'll restate those just as a devil's advocate. Let me start with the first one of the major concerns that I'll say brick and mortars expressed. You know, I'm speaking as the former 4th District Councilor, and many discussions that's been had in the past relative to this issue. So the idea of additional attractions to downtown is obviously, you know, is exciting to any and everybody, I would think. But I'm sure, you know, you've heard the argument, and me and Councilor Green has had this discussion as well. The concern is the requirements that brick and mortars have to follow and the cost associated with that to exist downtown. and the fact that those same requirements are not applied to food trucks. Right? So you have a business that goes through. Let me be clear. They jump through a number of hoops to exist downtown, and a physical structure in an actual space, and then with less requirements, another food vendor can pull up 100, 150 feet away and potentially intercept customers. So that's been the biggest argument I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, but I think it's necessary to state as much just to maybe get some feedback from you in that respect, if possible.
Sure.
And then I'll move on to the other ones I got. I won't take forever, though.
No, sure. So we have discussed that concern directly with several brick and mortar and eateries, specifically around the rodeos. I think that was one of the primary impacts, but I think the operation of food trucks in general. I think that we had heard from several businesses that, from their perspective, they weren't against the trucks themselves. They weren't against the concept of the rodeos. I think that they felt it really came back to really the conversations about what would be appropriate and what is that type of impact, and is it solely being felt on the same particular businesses or the same events. And so I think that was something that we tried to address here with looking at what is the frequency of those rodeos and what does that look like. And I think that certainly that these conversations are things that we're open to having as well.
And I understand how looking at frequency and the like is a way to kind of balance it out a little bit. I mean, honestly, we know that we can't all get everything we want, but I would expect that that's probably not satisfying enough for the brick and mortar, But I still empathize with that a bit, just because of the fact that we're aware of what's required to open a business, a restaurant specifically in downtown Syracuse, and the costs associated with build out and all of that kind of stuff. It's just there's a different level of requirement, and so I'm just stating that I get that argument, and the example I use, which is very loose but it's very practical. You can't just come pitch a tent in front of my house and live there, right? And so I paid for and jumped through a certain number of hoops to own the house where I live, and so for somebody to come and be able to do it at a simpler or with less restriction, fairness becomes the question. And I'm not saying whether it is, but like I said, I'm playing the devil's advocate here. The other thing, just on this, another point that I think is obviously of concern, you already have the festivals that happen in Clinton Square all summer. And so the food trucks and their ability to exist there in the in-between, if you will, is additional competition, right? Why are food carts not included? It's still food.
I can take that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've actually had discussions with staff from Senator Ramos's office down in New York, and she actually has proposed a bill in New York State that would essentially take away local control from all municipalities, and it would be state regulated for food carts. So we did start discussions about whether we should be changing our governance of food carts, but it was my thing. I held off on that because I didn't want to change something and then in the middle of the season have New York State overrule. So that's the reason why I held that.
New York State needs to stay out of our business and stop trying to do money grabs. Yeah, I mean, my thing is that food is food, and you got a hot dog building, and I come, even though hot dogs is probably not a bigger problem than some of the other stuff, and I come set up a cart in front of your business, I'm going to steal some of your business. I'm just expressing that I get the concern, and obviously I say this with appreciation for the amount of work you put into trying to find a balance here. But I get it. Let me kind of speed up and close this out here. Two more things real quick. Certain areas in terms of, like, I'm looking at food cart location or food truck locations, and some of it, I see the value, obviously, because they're like food deserts. Like there's no food spot on Onondaga Boulevard, for example, or for Brighton. Washington Square Park, I can see the value of it there. Solar Street, Marcellus, Kirkpatrick, all of that makes sense to me because there's nothing, at least not enough there. 900 to the 1300 block of Salina Street, there's nothing there yet. But there are certain other areas, though, where you have a singular business that might, for example, they're not screaming yet, but I'm sure they will, like the 400 block of South Ave. There's literally one food spot that people go to over there, and Bongo ain't show up yet, but he's coming. If he knows that you can park a bunch of food trucks outside his building, I just mentioning that as an example. And then the same apply. North Salina Street, East Water Street. There's places where you may have one or two food spots there, and I just wonder if the outreach has happened in that respect, and it has conversation happen with them. If so, I would have expected them to be here, and so I'm sure it hasn't. But I think that's necessary. That's not really a question. I'm just pointing it out. Sure. The last thing I want to mention, even in those same areas, especially neighborhood business corridors, you kind of get a mixed bag, right? Corey, I always want to call you the name you don't want me to call her. I always want to call her Madam Director, but she don't like it. People want things there, but then they'll complain about them at the same time. This is about outreach, right? Because you may have existing pedestrian traffic, but it doesn't concentrate necessarily. And you may have passing vehicular traffic, but it doesn't pull over, in neighborhood business corridors. And so for that reason, if this does roll out this way, especially in some of these areas, obviously the information getting out to people to let them know, you'll get a mixed bag, but at least they know that something is coming if it comes. Fair?
Yeah.
All right, that's all I got. Thanks.
Council.
Need my microphone? $20.
For me, I hear and understand what's going on here, but I want to hear perspective from people like America in terms of what does this do to downtown businesses. Since you,
That's what we're doing right now.
that's what we're doing. Well, I'll wait.
Councilor Driscoll.
I was just curious if there had been, I see that Walnut Park is on here. I can imagine that would be, they would do a food truck rodeo would do very good business there, or a nighttime business there. Has there been any discussion with the university, or, do we have any outreach in those neighborhoods that we've had any discussion with neighbors? Because I think my personal perspective is to, I'm definitely a huge fan of the food trucks. I just want to make sure that we're not, same thing as a musician, you don't tread the same ground too often. You try to play one area for 1 week, one area the next week, so that you make sure that you pollinate all the different fields. So I think Walnut would be a great one, both rodeo and late night. So I was curious if any conversations had happened with the neighbors and with the university and that stuff.
Sure. So with regards to direct outreach to stakeholders in a particular area like Walnut Park, I think we wanted to make sure and bring this up directly to council first, broach this, I think, and engage reaction, make sure we were on the right track. But to answer your question about Walnut Park in particular, so in years past, that has come up with applicants and with food trucks as a high profile location.
Yeah.
We looked at it and it was a challenge because of the fact that you have a one-way road on either side. There's certain trucks that have windows facing one area and then other windows facing the other, and it became logistically trying to allow a truck, and you wouldn't want to allow a truck up a one-way going the wrong way, even if it was temporarily to try and use a specific spot with traffic. So and this came out of our work group discussions, we literally were looking at mapping and imaging, and we felt like there was one section between the respective Walnut Place and Walnut Ave, I think, where we specifically can locate about 4, maybe 5 trucks. We felt like that was an opportunity that previously we didn't really consider that as a location or an option, and so we think it could work from a rodeo perspective. It certainly meets the distance requirement from the nearest eatery, with largely the concentration on that 100 block of Marshall. because you also have Whitman, the Whitman building and Syracuse's business school, and there's a lot of other facilities around that area. So this is something new. It's something we're trying out, and it is something we have to continue to learn as we go from a programming perspective. But Walnut in particular, that was a new avenue and opportunity that we saw here.
Yeah, I see the late night market is mostly being discussed around Perseverance and Clinton Square. I throw that out there too, that Walnut would be, you could do late night Walnut on a Tuesday as well. I think you'd get a crowd there, on weeknights past 10. While Marshall Street does provide some late night eatery, I think the attraction of a food truck down there would draw and especially young folks having being more enthusiastic about the concept, and it's definitely a youth movement in a lot of ways. The support that's resurging for food trucks. So I would just say I'd like to see that more heavily included in the rotation, because I think we've all heard from a lot of the brick and mortars, particularly in the Clinton Square area, and my hope would be to find a good pH balance with this program all around, where we're alternating. We find some other areas like Franklin that don't have anything really over there. We have a lot of business people over there, but no real restaurant scene, or chipping in on Walnut. I'd like to see it make sure we spread it out. So Walnut, I think, would be a high priority area for me to. I think it'd be a great, you got so many college kids, it'd be a great layup. So just investigate that further would be my hope.
Sure, the suggestion is helpful, and because of the fact that a street closure is involved, and certainly University Hill is a very critical area in terms of traffic flow, so we need to have those conversations next, but that's really helpful for us. So.
I think another option where you wouldn't have to do the street closure is sometimes when you go up, like during Mayfest, they're not necessarily parked on the street. Like, they're literally in the park, like in the grass. So then if you do it that way, you wouldn't need a street closure. So that's always an option as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think something to continue to explore. One of the things we wanted to make sure is that we weren't with trucks or driving up on the grass, potentially damaging whether it's grass or other shrubbery, things like that within the park itself. So something I think we will continue to explore, but helpful as well.
Councilor Carney?
Yeah. So two things. One, just to reiterate this, that I really think there needs to be a focus on, if we're doing late night, wherever it is, whether it's Walnut or downtown over in Perseverance or Clinton Square if it's open, we really need to have a police presence, because I think, look at having them on Walnut, I think discourages some activity from occurring, maybe fights breaking out, because you see 6 officers standing on the street corner. But if you have a bunch of rowdy people who want to fight over a sausage sandwich at 3 a.m, if there's not an officer there, their issues are going to stem from it. And so my other question, and again, I know we're started talking about implementing and changing things, but do we have an idea of what the maximum number of trucks, rodeos, like what are we thinking? Because look, as a small business owner that does a little bit of lunch, it would probably kill me if there was right across the street a food truck doing essentially the same thing that didn't have to pay the rent and the thing. And it is, jump through the hoops, the grease trap that I have to have, all the goofy things that come along with having brick and mortar. I can, appreciate where some folks in that downtown area that are around where these rodeos occur are concerned about it, and probably, I'm sure, have numbers to prove that they've lost out on business. But I don't want to discourage new types of business from coming into the area. I think it's important that we have food trucks. I mean, the fact that where I went to college in Plattsburgh, New York, has food trucks and late night activity, and we don't in Syracuse, is kind of shocking.
We never want to lose out to Plattsburgh.
You never want to lose out to Plattsburgh. So I guess what's the idea? I know there are 4 locations that we have here listed. How many are we thinking? How many trucks are allowed at each location? I'd like to actually see more specific details on what's proposed than just, I know we're doing sort of an overlook of, here are some list of a lot of different things that we're changing, but I'd be more interested in getting into specifics of how many are we thinking, how many trucks at each location.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric mentioned that the idea was for a cap was to put 14. That was an idea. That's a proposal. That's, we're open to suggestions, but that's, you know, I think as Councilor Bay referred to, we're trying to strike a balance here. And so that's a number that is out there, but certainly open to suggestions from the involved stakeholders. And then, I mean, in terms of what constitutes a rodeo, I think it's 4.
Yep, so the way the ordinance reads, a rodeo itself would be 4 or more food trucks all located in the same location and selling food.
And do we max it out at 4? That's my question. Are we going to have, I mean, I understand there's a minimum of it constitutes. Is there a cap of saying this is the most?
The most trucks themselves.
Yeah. Like, how does that, I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how, like, do we set?
Clinton Square, it's 6.
6.
That's just logistically can only fit in there. I think
Yeah.
Franklin Square, it's 2 or 3. I don't think we've like studied that closely, but it's a smaller area. I think in the university area, I think you're looking at 4 or 5. And again, this is more just based on the geography of
What fits?
can
No.
fit in.
That's I think that's sort of my question, because I can understand if we're going to say you're no longer, if Clinton Square is the biggest and you have 6, well then you move to the other locations and, you know, a couple of the trucks that normally would go do that are going to get cut off. So, you know, I want to be fair to, you know, brick and mortar places, but I also want to be fair to, you know, what could potentially be something new that our city could, you know, benefit from.
Yeah, us too.
Councilor Hogan.
Thank you, Councilor Green. I had the assessment commissioner pull up some figures of some unnamed buildings that house restaurants, and a lot of these folks downtown are, I would call them the pioneers of downtown, especially in the Armory Square area. You know, being a long-serving city employee, I remember when nobody went downtown. In fact, the only restaurant downtown was a place called the Packing House, which you could get a sort of a good meatloaf dinner, but you also could get a short-term investment in, you know, like on the Browns or the Dodgers or whatever. That was the only place that that was open downtown. There was a couple CD bars, Hanover Square and West Fayette Street. So successive city administrations, you know, encouraged people to come downtown by staging events, and I had a little bit to do with it. I was on the Clinton Square Renovation Committee, and we were successful. And a lot of people decided to spend a lot of money downtown to renovate old buildings. So there's a couple of places here in Armory Square. One place on Fayette Street pays $38,000 in taxes a year.
The restaurant
city,
or the building owner?
The building owner, who was a restaurant owner and decided to buy the building.
So it's for the whole structure?
Yes, for the whole structure. The other two, there's another couple of buildings. Some of these folks have found success downtown, so they bought another building. Both these buildings together pay $56,000 city, county, and school district taxes. Now, this is added into, like Councilor Bay and Councilor Carney said, folks who have a staff of waitresses, bartenders, they pay all those associated taxes, payroll taxes and all that, and sales taxes. So I guess the question for me is, how do we justify this competition on a public space, which is Clinton Square, where the city, federal government paid about $7 million to put in place, and right in the middle of Armory Square and Hanover Square? I mean, I just don't get it. I'm sorry. I'm unutterably opposed to having any kind of rodeos in Clinton Square, any kind of competition with these folks, a lot of them who have put their blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of money into places and are open for business and pay a lot of taxes to the city of Syracuse and made this a vibrant city, especially in the downtown area. I understand the folks, you know, as far as wanting to be entrepreneurs and all that, and I think a lot of them have like tremendous menus and all that. I know they were up on West Fayette Street for a while. I think their menus stand alone, and I think people would go to see them, but I can't see them in Clinton Square, and I just won't. If this comes before, I'll probably offer an amendment to keep Clinton Square clear of any kind of truck rodeos. So that's all I got to say.
Councilor Allen?
I appreciate Councilor Hogan for that comment. My comments were similar. As a district councilor, of course, my concern would be the businesses that are already downtown. And I don't want to see them suffer with all of the work that they put in, the money that they put in, and they suffer from just visitors, so to speak. I do have one question about I don't know if it was in here or it's in the email. So we went from 21 to 14 ideally, but what was the metrics to get us to 14?
The thought process behind that. So this year in 2020, we've received 21 applications and that was from one applicant for Clinton Square. We were looking at, okay, how do you put in a limitation or scale back, and really about the concentrated impact on one particular area being hurt, and or for those brick and mortar businesses. So that was a 33% decrease of just working off of. We've received 21. Submissions, and so that would scale that back for the 2020 season, and thereby looking at the impact that was being felt, and reducing that by 7 days for those brick and mortar establishments.
Okay, so they would have no more than 21 days starting from, what was it, like
14.
So the proposed
14.
cap that we had put forward that we thought might strike a good balance was 14. So the request was 21. We are proposing that it be capped at 14 instead.
So the balance isn't really balanced, because the balance for me would have been half. It would have been 10.
I mean, we're open to, this is, these are proposed amendments. So, we're certainly open to changes that the council wants to see. This is, Eric, I think, as Councilor Bay acknowledged, has put a lot of time into trying to strike a balance. We don't want to see brick and mortar restaurants suffer either.
Right.
That's not our goal. What we're trying to do is balance the needs of and the desire of the brick and mortar with those of the food trucks that, provide their own benefits and vibrancy, and a lot of growing cities have food trucks, and we're trying to strike a balance between those establishments that have invested in downtown, have been here for a long time, and the food trucks that, we believe we want to see in the city as well. We're just trying to strike a balance. But, if we've gone too far one way or the other, that's why we're here.
And the only other thing I would just say is, another way of looking at it is there's 351 days a year when food trucks are banned from Clinton Square, would be the other way to look at it too. Sorry, I had to keep going.
Nope, you're fine.
Okay, we'll do, right. All right, Councilor Majuk, and then we're going to open it up to public.
Thank you. I'm still waiting for. So
Better make it good, America.
So for me, I want to understand the second point here in terms of if you are going to take this into the neighborhoods. For example, I see out of the 6 parks here, 3 of them are in my district. Mm-hmm. And these parks have houses like right there. Mm-hmm. And that's the level of the traffic and the noise. That's a concern for me in terms of if you are going to operate this there, that's going to raise concern, especially for the neighbors and other things. So I want you to be mindful of that as you do that. And the second question following that is, what are the days of the week? Is this Monday through Friday? What are the hours, especially in the neighborhood, that you are going to do this? And the third part of that is, you talk about a way of managing trash. For me, as you think this through, could you be very explicit in terms of the trash management? Say, Elmwood is, for example, in my district, is a beautiful park. You bring all of this around there, it's probably going to leave a lot of trash there. What do we do with that? Mm-hmm. And we don't want to be reactive. I want very explicit language so that whoever is authorized to do business knows the consequences of not doing what is asked of them. So just those 3 questions for me would question more than recommendation, more than questions.
Sure. So just to give a little more context on, with regards to the ordinance itself, trash trash is explicitly included as far as number of trash receptacles. So with the rodeos especially, we're looking to increase that from 1 to 2. Within a 25-foot radius, every truck, and this is whether there's a rodeo or whether it's a single operator, is responsible for cleaning up within 25 feet of their truck itself. So that is something. I think that goes back to enforcement as well, and making sure that they're held to that standard. It's written within the ordinance. With regards to the park and how residences or neighborhood residents might be impacted, it would have to take place within the park itself. So you couldn't park on, for example, a street that might be facing into the park or by the entrance. You'd have to be physically within it, and that's certainly city-controlled land. And then there are communities that do have a distance requirement from a single family or a detached residential structure. That's something we could explore, what that distance requirement might be. We can look into comparisons. But specifically, if there is concern about how a resident or how a residential structure might be impacted, it's something we can look into.
And the hours of that, will they comply with the park's hours? Because I think parks usually close at 9, right?
Close at dusk. Yeah.
Any operator would have to comply based on if no one is allowed into a park, quote unquote, at a certain time, then that would include trucks under our parks authority. With regards to just hours in general within the ordinance, the only time that hours would now be dictated would be that late night service. And that would be because on a given work day, we wouldn't want trucks mounting into Perseverance Park. It really is explicitly for that late night service from that 10 a.m. to about, or 10 p.m. to about 3 a.m. So that's in the ordinance itself. That's the only time where hours of operation are dictated.
Just to follow up a little bit, in terms of those that go ahead and not follow what the ordinance is saying, will there be explicit language in terms of if you don't follow, A, B, C, D will happen?
Mm-hmm. It's all revocable, so we could pull your permit anytime.
Okay, is that the punishment?
Yep.
Okay.
Revocable certainly if they're not in compliance with what we've stated within the ordinance, and really we've had very productive conversations with parks and the Parks Department from a special events perspective, and then the Syracuse Police Department, and I've been talking to several of our officers. We will actively work with SPD on whatever is formally voted on and adopted, but Syracuse Police also have the opportunity to make sure that trucks are operating in compliance, have approvals, that have their license or permit. So all of that, I think, tailors back to enforcement as well, which is something we're looking at stepping up.
Okay, so I'll do the first one up, and then we'll go on deck. So first one is Joe Flateau, and next is Nick Sanford.
Councilor Green, could we, people introduce themselves and give their maybe business address too before?
Yeah, if they're a business, so, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if they're vendors.
Sure, yeah, sure, go on. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes.
Sure. My name is Joe Flateau. I work at Sidearm Sports, which is located in the State Tower building, just a block or two over. I have a statement here from our founder, CEO, who's not able to make it today. So here we go. There are 261 work days in a year. On those days, many of the Sidearm Sports employees buy lunch for lunch for themselves from local businesses. As a staff of 75, we enjoy supporting downtown establishments, not just for lunch, but also for many dinners when we have clients and partners in town. When we go home, we talk about these restaurants with our family and friends, which brings additional business downtown to the downtown community. I am respectfully asking that we retain the same number of Wednesdays we allow food trucks to do business downtown as we had last year. This allows all of our employees to go outside, socialize with others from the community, and experience Syracuse in ways we otherwise wouldn't. I fully understand and am sympathetic to the economic impact this may have on brick and mortar businesses during these days, and would be happy to discuss ways to encourage employees or companies to drive business and or events on the other summer days and nights. I could make the argument that getting employees out of the office these 5 days encourages them to go out other days of the week and visit new places of business, which increases foot traffic to brick and mortar establishments. I believe that reducing or eliminating the food truck days would have an adverse effect on the downtown food ecosystem, and am respectfully asking that you can consider maintaining the number of food truck days. Thank you for your time.
Nick Sanford, followed by America. Hold on, let me set your timer. Go for it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Sanford. I'm the owner of Toss and Fire Wood Fire Pizza. I'm also the president of the Syracuse Food Truck Association. Thank you for taking the time to hear our position. The Syracuse Food Truck Association was created to bring together mobile food vendors to promote, educate, and lobby for the fast-growing food truck culture here in Syracuse and Central New York. Our group has 24 members operating in and around the city of Syracuse, with 10 of our members also operating brick-and-mortar locations, 3 of them within a block of the Clinton Square Food Truck Rally. The Clinton Square Food Truck Rally was a product of the food truck members and the city council members and the city of Syracuse itself to help make Syracuse a more progressive and vibrant city. Our organization rented Water Street for approximately $5,000 for 21 days. This is the same process used for an event like the downtown Syracuse Farmers Market. This market also has food truck vendors. I've been one of them for the last 5 years. On Tuesdays, 3 to 6 vendors. It's also used for things like festivals, etc. So the Food Truck Rally obviously had a very successful year. That's why we're all here discussing it. We had customers coming from outside of the city. We had customers coming from businesses that we just heard from the university area, from hospitals, from everywhere. We were hearing from guests every single week that they were so excited to finally have food trucks in Syracuse, to finally see food trucks operating, especially, being able to visit these community spaces when the weather was nice. And we were always quick to inform these guests that we were so happy to see that the city was finally being food truck friendly, and we were having these events. There's a lot of misconceptions about food trucks, such as that we don't pay the same insurances or taxes or any of those type of things, and it's just untrue. I'm a brick and mortar owner and a food truck owner, and I assure you that we pay sales tax, workers' comp, disability, all of these different things along with others. Can I get 30 more seconds?
Sorry. Why don't you, if you have that statement, give it to us, and then we'll also give it to everyone, just because otherwise it'll go.
Okay. I have one really important point.
10 seconds, go.
Okay. So we paid, if our 24 members buy the $500 permit and rent Clinton Square, we are putting $17,000 to the city of Syracuse. Take that money, divide it by 21 days, and we're paying $805 a day to rent Clinton Square. It's take $805 and
Thanks.
It's a lot more money than a lot of these brick and mortars are paying in property taxes when you break it down.
Thanks, Nick.
So thank you guys.
America, followed by Jay Cartini.
I want to thank you all for the opportunity to have the conversation today. I think we like food trucks. We think food trucks add vitality to our downtown atmosphere. There are so many different constituencies in downtown that we need to balance. We want to make sure that all of our different constituents are successful. Collectively, all of us are working towards creating a more vibrant community, and that is, I think, what our key goal is. Honestly, this is going to be a really good thing if we can all just figure out what our balance is and how we can make everyone happy with this. Last year, our Counselor, to your point, the days of the food truck rodeos, our downtown restaurants reported 40 to 60% losses in their business. Restaurants already run on extremely thin margins. New York State continues to make it increasingly challenging for businesses to operate, so the thought of New York State becoming more involved in some of the ordinances here is very concerning. But when a restaurant experiences the equivalent of 2 to 3 weeks of lost revenue, that adds up. That is income and revenue that they were relying on to carry them through those slower winter and fall months. Where they're relying on that income to carry them through, to have that 365-day-a-year presence, we're relying on our downtown restaurants and all of our ground floor businesses to create that vibrant downtown community that adds to the atmosphere. It brings people downtown. It gives people a reason to come experience all that we have to offer. We're also relying on the support and the presence that those downtown restaurants provide for vital community services, police, fire, parks, D.P.W. All of those are funded by property taxes paid by the downtown restaurants. We saw last year that having the rodeos at the same location consistently in Clinton Square produced significant financial negative impacts on our district. We need to be thinking long-term about the policies that we're putting in place to make sure not only are we able to create a thriving food truck culture, but they're also able to make sure that we're supporting our downtown businesses and restaurants. We need to find a way to support all of our downtown businesses and our city businesses' needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay Cartini, followed by Fadi Kabas.
Hello, my name is Jay Cartini, and I own the oldest Carvel in the country, which happens to be located in DeWitt, New York. We'll be celebrating our 75th year in operation, which also makes us one of the oldest businesses in the county. I'm also the owner of Sterling Capital Management, and we will be celebrating our 30th year in business. Before moving to DeWitt, we were located in Armory Square for over a decade. So why am I here today? Well, because I'm also a member of the Syracuse Food Truck Association. My experience as a business owner, food truck operator, investor, and advisor gives me a unique perspective to the issues at hand. To be successful in business, you have to identify one of two things: either a problem that requires a solution or a need that requires fulfillment. We as independent food truck operators and business owners have identified a need. That need was to have a variety of food options within walking distance of your place of residency or employment. So we created a food truck rodeo in the center of downtown, satisfying the need of the customer, the people, your constituents, the voters. Now, if we were simply to open a restaurant, would we be having this conversation? I don't think so. It has been brought to our attention that some of the concerns that have been raised are from traditional brick and mortar restaurants that are claiming unfair competition. I'm going to have to disagree. As we have 3 members whose restaurants are the closest to the Clinton Square Food Truck Rodeo, and they've told us that not only have their Wednesday lunch numbers not decreased, they've actually increased. So I challenge anyone who says otherwise to simply prove it, that they've been harmed. Backroom conversations and anonymous comments are not fact. Those complaining are simply not offering the services, products, or selection that we provide. It's not a government's job to decide where people can eat, and it's not a restaurant's job to decide who can open for business and what competition there should be.
Thanks, Jay.
Okay.
You can leave that with us if you
All
want.
right.
Fadi Kabas, followed by Brianna Petroshi. Thank you.
How's it going? My name is Fadi Kabas. I'm also on the board of the Syracuse Food Truck Association. I want to thank you guys for having us again. I just want to start off by saying that I actually staked my claim here in Syracuse. 10 years ago, I opened up a brick and mortar restaurant called D.P.W, and I actually had the downtown committee work very hard with us in order for grants and help us develop an old building that we were able to successfully run now for 10 years. And I'm just confused on how we keep going back and forth on how competition hurts. Bringing a bunch of density to the area and students from all over that are excited come into our restaurants on Wednesday to get things that aren't on our food truck menu, and they're able to get food for takeout, call an order. So our business has actually increased on Wednesdays due to having a density of food trucks in the area. And I think there is a balance, and I think there's definitely a misconception between food truck and brick and mortars. We all work very hard. I have my blood, sweat, and tears for over a decade. I lived in Armory Square for over 15 years. I got my master's from Syracuse University School of Whitman, my undergrad from Oswego State, and I have my associates from OCC. So I decided to stake my claim in Syracuse in order to help it grow. And I've seen other cities. I've been to sporting events around the country, and there's food trucks seen as growing everywhere. And it's just, I think it's going to be a definitely will hurt our city if we decide to step back and not allow food trucks to operate in the 14 weeks that we allow. Thank you.
Thank you. Brianna, followed by Kevin Schwab.
Hi, my name is Brianna Petrosi. I'm the food truck manager for Papagayo Taco Truck. We're a proud member of the Syracuse Food Truck Association, and we support their position on the rodeos. Personally, I'd like to take my time to speak in relation to the proposed block systems. While offering these additional 60 blocks as a food truck forward approach, it is a facade and doesn't solve the issues that we have, because the issue is not the number of locations that we can park, but it's the availability, because there is not designated food truck parking, rendering them virtually useless. Many of these blocks are not accessible during prime time hours and are not in traffic areas where people could easily find us. Papagayo Taco Truck is 25 foot long. I can't just wait for one car to pull away for me to be able to pull in. I need at least 2 spots to be able to get into an accessible spot for me to park. So then the solution would be to arrive earlier. For my situation, we utilize our commissary for all of our food prep. Some other food trucks prep on the truck so they can use that time, whereas I would just be sitting there waiting for people to show up. So I only need 30 minutes before my service time, so for me to arrive at 10:30 is very unlikely in our current proposed situation. So if I had to arrive at 6 a.m. before all the cars arrive, before the workforce arrives, I'm adding 5 hours to my day. And also logistical nightmare of having to go get hot food from my restaurant and delivered to my food truck, having to find another car for or another parking spot for the car, yada yada. Efficiency is required for me to continue offering high-quality, low-cost food options. And as a starting point, I believe it would be beneficial to refine the list and select a number of parking spaces in the more lucrative areas that we decide is, however, and have signs to say that no parking between 8 and 12 and 3 and 6, or they'll get towed or ticketed or however that would work out. And therefore, if the truck is not there, then a car could park there and you don't lose that, that street parking. I will share this with you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Kevin Schwab, followed by Don Boucher.
Hi, my name is Kevin Schwab. I'm with Center State CEO, and I'm also a proud resident of the city of Syracuse. And to everyone who's come out today with a food truck, I'm pretty sure I've given every one of you way too much money over the years, especially Todd, Cheeky Monkey, Q Salt Potato. I could go right down the menu. And I first became acquainted with Toss and Fire when you guys were just a food truck. So I know how valuable you are, and I know how important you are to this community. That said, we are a member business organization, and I can tell you we have heard from a number of our downtown businesses in the restaurant space who feel the impact when we have food truck rodeos in Clinton Square. And balance is the word that a number of you have used and a number of you have used. And I think that's going to be the key to this whole thing. I don't know that 2 weeks worth of income impacts on downtown businesses, restaurants that are paying property tax, which is the key difference, right? That are paying property tax 365 days a year. I don't know that that's a balance, and that's the key part of this. It's finding the right thing. Whether that really means 7, especially as you're looking at, for example, the rest of the city opening up opportunities that haven't been there, whether it's working with the Hill, where I found, frankly, Toss and Fire at first was over in the Westcott area. We know there are plenty of opportunities, and one of the great things about food trucks is they draw people in. So there are fantastic benefits. We would certainly hope to see that not just in one location like Clinton Square, but in fact opened up to spread in many of the neighborhoods that can use the attention that the food trucks draw. Let's really look for some of the benefits to the community beyond just, well, hey, they'll be in one spot and you go to them almost the same way you would to a brick and mortar. Let's look for the opportunity to say, we can add some vibrancy, some life to many parts of the city, and I think that begins with setting up multiple locations.
Thank you, Kevin. Don, followed by Kyle Madden.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Boudry. I'm the owner of Cluckenberger Food Truck, and I'm the president of CNY Food Truck Alliance, which is a nonprofit food truck organization made up of 18 food and dessert trucks right here in central New York. First, I'd like to say to Mr. Bay, you talked about real quick was the cost difference between businesses and what they have to go through to jump through hoops. We're talking code, water, plumbing, fire. The food trucks, too, also have to go through that. And which was just brought to our attention last week is that On December 6, 2019, the State Fire Prevention and Building Code just changed the codes for all food trucks. It wasn't the state that's adding this. It was the Syracuse Fire Department was acting on a code from 2015. So between now and May 12th, there are approximately 50 food trucks that are now going to have to spend between $5,000 and $10,000 to outfit their truck to bring it current, just like any other brick and mortar, with their fire suppression systems, with their propane, with their propane lines. All of this has to go through inspected. And as Nick Sanford said, we all pay taxes. We have insurance, we have workers' comp, we have disability. And although we're two different organizations, we have creative differences. I do know when we were downtown and several of our members were downtown for the Wednesday events. I did 9 events there. Several of our other members were average. The first 4 weeks, we peaked about 1,000 people. Then all of a sudden, we became part of the landscape. And then some of the trucks in that rodeo festival started to fall off. We went from 6 down to 5, some days 3. So we become part of the landscape. So it's not like we're there every week just pulling out tons of money. And ultimately, we all know is that downtown is a revenue driven. If it wasn't revenue driven for a food truck, we wouldn't be downtown. Secondary, we all want to say it's for our customers, but it's really revenue driven, customers second. But at the same time, their position is great. If they want to put all their eggs in one basket, that's great. We would like to do a revolving Billings Park, Clinton Square, other locations that are more viable in the city of Syracuse.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Kyle Madden, followed by Jeannie Catalfano. And then that's the last one.
Got taco for us.
It's good to see you up there, Chol. It really is. Thank you to the council for having this meeting today. Thank you, Councilor Green, for your continued help on this matter, and certainly to Eric Ennis, thank you for everything you've done over the last couple of months to put this together and get us to this point. I don't have much to add. I think that a lot of the other trucks have talked about it. One of the things I keep hearing about is this property tax bit, and that owners of existing restaurants have to pay property taxes to be where they are. They're not paying property taxes, they pay rent. Building owners pay property taxes. We have to pay rent to the city of Syracuse in the tune of $500 a year to have the chance to participate in this food truck program. It doesn't guarantee us a location. I can't say that I'm always at the corner of Fayette Street and Walton Street like Kitty Hoynes can. It really is a hindrance to us to be able to operate in the city based on the existing rules of the blocks that we can park in and the availability of those spaces of some other trucks have mentioned. My preference would be continuing to push toward a designated location, 2 or 3 throughout the downtown area in particular, and in potentially other locations around the city where a number of food trucks could operate on a first come, first served basis throughout the year. The other thing I want to talk about is we mentioned briefly from the downtown committee about their tighter margins over the winter months. Food trucks experience tight margins over the winter months too. It's zero income and significantly a lot of burden and hardship to get through the winter. We have a very short season of sometime between 7 and 8 months. So for approximately all of us, we have no opportunity to make income over that winter month. So we're really trying to do the best we can on very tight margins. I also just had some brief questions and things about some of the things that were mentioned. We talked about trash management. I think all the trucks here are more than willing to participate in some type of a program that ensures that trash is picked up around our businesses. I'd also encourage the council to consider making sure that other takeaway businesses around the city of Syracuse are required to maintain trash cans around their facilities. The same should go for convenience stores. None of those currently exist. And I'm curious about Perseverance Park and how that would operate in terms of the number of trucks going in and going out. But otherwise, thank you again for your time and for your help on this matter.
Thanks, Kyle. Jeannie. Pull it down.
You call me short. Hi, my name is Jeannie Catalfano. I think everyone said a lot of great things, so I'm just going to kind of add on a little bit more. I'm the owner of the Bite Box Food Truck. I sit on the board for the Syracuse Food Truck Association, and I do own a restaurant in Syracuse and one in Cortland, New York also. There's a couple points that I just want to have you guys consider. First, I'd like to emphasize the fact that we're not here to have any animosity with any downtown restaurants. In fact, we believe as an association in supporting local businesses, not just ours, but ones outside of the association. I spend $25,000 a year with a downtown restaurant buying product off them. We try to support them in as many ways as we can. Nick ran out of time talking about the financials, but we do contribute a ton of money to downtown Syracuse. We do pay all the same operating costs on top of that. And, we have to pay for our commissaries as well. So we are dealing with grease trap and, property taxes and school taxes and all of that. So we are paying essentially all the same money plus more money to operate within the city. So, financially, it's kind of a moot point. And also, the fact is the evidence does not support the belief that the food truck industry hurts the restaurant industry. If I had more than 2 minutes, I would give you the research on it, but...
You can email us.
What's that?
You can email us.
I will.
appreciate that,
In
yeah.
fact, cities around the country are reporting that food trucks boost the restaurant industry for several reasons. The first is that it's a stepping stone for new restaurants. Many restaurants get their start from food trucks, as a lot of our members do. Second, food trucks provide existing restaurants with a great way to market and expand their businesses. We're beginning to see this trend in Syracuse right now, where restaurants are starting to acquire food trucks, and you're seeing it all the time, and it's just going to keep continuing to grow. And finally, the presence of food trucks increases the number of customers available to restaurants. Food trucks draw people out of their offices and homes and into the community, opening their eyes to all the meal options their neighborhood has to offer. We constantly hear from customers during the rally that they've never been downtown before, or how excited they are to finally see food trucks in Syracuse. We're always quick to inform them that we finally have the government that is food truck friendly and supports the growing industry. Food trucks increase exposure to everything that Syracuse downtown has to offer. I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you.
And just to follow up, I'd love to see any articles about national data. That'd be quite helpful.
That was the last one.
Councilor Bay?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a couple statements for everybody's consideration. If you don't know me, I love when people call me directly because I like to give you a response. First, with due respect, it is government job to determine where businesses exist and what type of businesses exist. So that's not what it. You said, right. You talked about where people go to eat. But it's all, I'm just going to clarify for you. We determine what businesses exist where and how they exist. Second, it's a fallacy that food trucks pay the same money that brick and mortars do. And it's interesting to hear the argument. I can appreciate the argument, but we're the ones counting the money and putting the rules in place. And we know that the rules are different. And so it's not to say that there's no value in food trucks. That's not the statement. My statement, for example, was we need to find a way to find a balance. We have to be fair. And that part can't be discounted. I think I heard the argument, which sounded to me like lack of interest in other areas around the city. I can only assume that's for a number of reasons. One, because downtown is what it is, but there's a misconception about retail purchasing power in other areas of the city. The city recently did a study on neighborhood business corridors, which is probably why a lot of these recommendations came up. But I'll speak specifically about one area on the south side of the city that spends more money on retail than the total average consumer in the city and the county. And that's on South Salina Street, $125 million a year. $1.7 million annual demand for food that doesn't exist. Those kind of numbers need to be known if you're really talking about trying to grow up your business. So it's not just downtown, because that area spends more money on food than even downtown. That's just a point to mention. I understand the point, Mr. Madden, in regards to some restaurants do rent. Some may own their facilities, but rent translates to tax money, right? And the same applies for any landlord who rents to a tenant if he doesn't have a tenant or she doesn't have a tenant. And obviously their money is limited. A couple of things real quick that come to mind. Pre-development meetings and the costs associated with that for developers, for one. Even for persons who may be putting in new facilities, they still have to deal with all of our departments, just as you do in some respects. Certificates of use and the fees associated with those, certificates of occupancy and the fees associated with those are examples of fees that you don't pay. I think it's what's, you can't ever, and I understand it, but you can't ever call finance as a moot point. And I think it's, you have to consider, not to be too nerdy up here, but the first proposition of Euclid. On any given straight line, an equilateral triangle can be formed. What it essentially implies is that with everything that exists, there's an opposite. There is no way that there is an action without a reaction. There's no way that there's any kind of change or addition where there's not some kind of result, positive or negative. And I'm not saying that I know absolutely what it is, but if you put one thing in a location where it wasn't before, it has an impact, no matter what it is. So I think we have to be careful about implying that there's no impact on brick and mortar. That's not possible. Math says it's not possible. Opinion loses in the face of mathematics. I always quote in here that it's the one science you can't discredit is arithmetic. And I certainly put out the challenge to anybody to discredit addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So I only state that because I don't want our message to be misconstrued, certainly not mine. I agree. While I am a strict vegetarian and don't go to food trucks much or at all, doesn't mean, I'm not the only person in Syracuse. There's a lot of people who do. There's certainly a benefit and a certain attractiveness to it. But if a balance can be reached, I would think that that's ideal. If not, with the current proposal, we have to reconsider something else. Right.
Thanks, Councilor. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay. So we are getting close to the season now. This is something we have to do somewhat soon. So we do still have some details in the ordinance itself. So obviously the full council wouldn't vote on that until we've all had time, but we may not meet D.P.W. again until after that. So I would like a motion to move this out of committee to then go to the agenda. So I'll make a motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
There's only three, so it passes 3-0. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And if anyone wants to stick around, I'll be here for a couple minutes if you want to talk more. So, thanks.